Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Rabbi F. Schwartz podcast. I would like everyone please to watch it and comment if you like, and please subscribe to the channel. We have a wonderful guest. We have Olga Deutsch. Olga Deutsch is the chair for the World Zionist Conference. She has been a person involved in Jewish and Israeli matters for many, many years. She's also the vice president of the NGO Monitor. Tell us how you started into these types of doings and types of professions and occupation, what drew you into this type of life?
Well, I guess I should start with telling you where I'm from. I'm originally from Serbia, which is former Yugoslavia, from a tiny Jewish community, and a country that was torn by wars on and off throughout my childhood. So actually, it was the State of Israel, the Jewish Agency, and other institutions that had me evacuated twice in my childhood. First in early 19s, in 1992, when the war in Bosnia broke out. I was evacuated with a couple of hundreds of other Jewish kids from the area and spent a year in Israel. And then again in 1999, when NATO bombed Serbia over its dispute with Kosovo, I also was basically brought from a torn, warren region and bombs, and I came to Israel. Throughout my childhood, I was also very involved in the Jewish community, but all these things together sort of made me realize that, it takes a full lifetime to be an involved Jew. And just like the Jewish cycle itself, we evolve and our role in the Jewish life evolves. Once you find yourself on the receiving end, right? I was rescued many times over, by the generosity of people in North America mainly, who were kind enough to donate money to Jewish institutions, the Zionist institutions, and then B, thanks to the mobilization and leadership of the people in the Zionist institutions. But sometimes you find yourself within this cycle on the giving end. Now, so you can give through donations in kind, in money, or by being active and involved. And I guess my way of giving back is by being involved in different Jewish organizations. When I was a student, I chaired the European Union of Jewish Students, which is an umbrella organization giving a political voice to Jewish young people in Europe. And although my professional background is in business, 10 years ago, I chose to leave the private sector. And that's when I joined NGO Monitor, because I felt that it is not enough to make Aliyah and to make Israel your home. There is still much work to be done in defending our right to have a Jewish homeland. And that is my contribution to the overall fighting of anti-Semitism, because I think that the highest expression of our Jewishness today is Zionism. And the belief that this is ultimately the land that we were promised and we were given and that we are supposed to fulfill our Jewishness in. And consequently, fighting anti-Semitism today, I think one of the greatest challenges is defending our right to have a Jewish homeland in Israel. And this is being proven time and time again, because that is exactly the part of our Jewishness that is being continuously attacked. While there is a broad consensus over anti-Semitism coming from the far right, the white supremacists, and so on, and everyone will condemn it, right? And the legal system also knows how to prosecute it, how to penalize it. When it comes to anti-Zionism today, that sort of becomes this gray area. And I think that is where we need to give the biggest fight. And that is where I chose to be very, very involved. So it's a very long answer to your question, but I hope it gives a peek into why I chose to do what I do.
It's a very good answer. In fact, the answer you gave has to do with the portion, the Torah portion last week. I'll tell you how, because Jacob, Yaakov Avinu says he will tithe everything he has and give a tenth to 10% to Hashem, to the Creator, to the Baruch Hu. So the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said, one does not only tithe one's money, one also has to tithe one's time. So you're tithing, you're taking a part of your life, your time, and you're giving to something else. And that's an act of kindness. It's an act of giving back. And that's a very, very commendable thing. It's a very wise thing you just said. So that's also its introduction and also invitation to the audience. Tell people you don't have to only be a person involved in money, give to Israel, to give to Zionism, but being a person who's active, someone who wants to state the truth. So that being the case, then, since you are the VP of the NGO Monitor, what do NGOs do? And what is the purpose of NGOs? Not yours per se, but in general. So people have, if you could tell the audience, basically, when they hear the word NGO, sometimes they think it's a wonderful thing, it's a great group of people who have an ideal, or is it something else?
So most of the people will not even know what the acronym NGO stands for, right? That is short for non-governmental organization. Now, what happened, particularly after the Second World War, and pretty much this was the NGO sector was created in Europe after Nazi Germany was defeated, right? And imagine this whole new reality. The United Nations are created in order to defend universal rights of all, and never again is the leitmotif of all these developments. In post-Second World War Europe, the governments discussed and wanted to sort of have a safeguard, something that would be a watchdog over governments themselves, right? Because they said there's more than one way of being an active citizen, and you don't only have the only way is not to be elected and to serve in the parliament, but you can actually run a non-governmental organization. And this entire sector was supposed to be a dog watch to make sure that another Nazi Germany or another dictatorial regime will not come into power. So the reasons behind creating NGOs were very noble and very understandable, particularly in that period in time. But what we have seen over the years happen is that the NGO sector became just another industry. Right. So I come from the business sector, so I like to compare everything to industries, so or markets. So you would have the private sector, and then there's the public sector, the elected officials, the governmental officials, and then there's the third sector, the NGO sector. And what has happened over the years, because so much trust has been put in the NGO sector to begin with, right? To be the beacon of justice and truth and be the dog watch over the other two sectors, it sort of was left unattended and unmonitored and unaccountable for its actions. So while today so now fast forward to today, right? We have a situation in which it takes a tweet to take down a CEO of a major company or an elected official. When it comes to the NGO sector, they almost can do no wrong. Now, they are credited with incredible mission statements and a mandate to promote human rights, to defend the weaker, right, and the underrepresented, to promote justice, democracy, sustainable development. Oftentimes, they are the main vehicles to bring about democracy and stability into the third world countries. They are usually the most trusted partners to provide humanitarian aid in conflict-ridden areas and so on and so forth. But the fact that they were not bound to the same checks and balances and to the same rules that we apply and deem as most normal, right? And the standards of the standard way of running the business in other sectors left a vacuum in which too many of them are being abused and used as vehicles to do exactly the opposite of what they were originally mandated, which is to promote the human rights. To zoom even further into our issues, right? Israel-related issues, the entire human rights community is being used as a vehicle to vilify Israel. So you would have an organization like Human Rights Watch, with such a noble name. Not only a noble name, Human Rights Watch was created by a Jew, and it was created to rescue the Jews in the former Soviet Union. Right, let my people go, and the entire movement was sort of led by this organization. And today, this is the main organization accusing Israel of apartheid, genocide, starvation. This is the organization that is one of the main groups that filed lawsuits against US and other governments in order to push them to not supply Israel with arms in the past 15 months when Israel needed the most, right? The help. So Human Rights Watch is only one such organization. Then you have groups like Amnesty International, the big, Oxfam. These are the biggest groups. But then comes an array of mid-sized and smaller organizations that most of your listeners or viewers have never heard of. But they all go by the name of human rights organizations, and they all want you to believe that they're bringing about peace to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whereas in practice they are working at best to undermine Israel's legitimacy, and at worst to literally cancel its right to exist as a Jewish democracy. Because all the slogans from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, or one state solution, right? They basically mean one thing, and they're all proclaimed in the name of human rights and justice. So we have an industry that was seemingly created to promote these noble values and noble causes, but particularly when it comes to Israel, it does exactly the opposite. Now, I would not want your viewers to think that it is only the case when it comes to Israel. Israel is like in everything else, in media and everything else, it is overrepresented, or there is sort of an obsession over Israel. But the NGO industry is equally biased when it comes to other conflicts. It sort of decides who's right and who's wrong even before looking into what is the real issue, and then it just pushes its very aggressive agenda. A few years ago, we looked at a much smaller in scale conflict, the Nagorno-Karabakh, between the Azeri and the Azerbaijan, and we saw that similarly the NGOs claim to be doing mediation, and when you would scratch the surface, there was none of that, and there was no way of showing, or let alone proving, that there was any type of effectiveness or advancement and improvement after decades of their involvement. Now, to make this even more dangerous, when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a lot of these groups go by the name human rights organizations, but they actually are affiliated to Palestinian designated terror groups. And then you can imagine what kind of agendas they are promoting. So it is sort of an industry that is inflated in what is expected of it. And the importance that is being granted, and is being granted an incredible legitimacy and importance, because just last week, a new Amnesty International's report was published on the war in Gaza, 256 pages accusing Israel of genocide, systematic genocide. And every major paper wrote about it, and their reports are waited and expected, with grand anticipation, and they are afterwards being quoted as the objective sources of truth and analysis of what goes on on the ground. And then consequently, you would have UN resolutions that quote them and congressional resolutions or legislations and so on. So there is the effect that they have on the public discourse and the public opinion and what the public by and large holds as truth is tremendous. Whereas in practice, they're neither experts nor are there reports based on facts. And most times they're really political activists with a very, very clear agenda. And in our case, in Israel's case, it's not a pro-Israel agenda.
If you even notice in terms of movies, see movies, example, like criminals or crime movies with mafias or types of people who have, let's say, a certain organization or group, you always notice there's always happens to be someone in the neighborhood who's respectable, like the priest and so forth. But really, he's not really a priest. He's really a criminal wearing the frock of a priest. So you could say the same thing nowadays, the NGO. The NGO, so to speak, is supposed to be the holy person, the priest, the rabbi, the imam, whatever you want to call it. And he gives off the image, or she gives the image of a person holier than thou. And people being very, very naive will believe that. So it's a very, very wise and very politically astute thing to do, so to speak, to use NGOs as a weapon to manipulate people because people won't think that an NGO would be a bad thing, would be a bad player. So you come off in that type of a, atmosphere. So that being the case, for example, I remember very well back in the 80s when people were fighting for South Africa, when that really was fighting against an apartheid. If you notice, Umar Bakudi, who started the BDS movement, he had learned and saw that the trigger words of example, apartheid, human rights, of justice for all, and so forth, were something that the youth loved. Because people, when 18, 19 years old, they want to change the world. But many people don't try to do or will do their research. So what already have, example, you see an Israeli soldier, you think already have the image of a soldier with the M16 and a uniform and going against a Palestinian, a woman, you already assume already automatically that this is a bad person because the military against the civilian. So these are wonderful things, so to speak, in terms of weapons that the propaganda uses. So the question is, how can we teach the young people to differentiate, to see the difference? There's one case in point, because yesterday I saw a video where indigenous Native American Indians are fighting for our rights because they say, and we've been in Israel, we understand that Israel belongs to the Jewish people, there's history there, there's archaeology there, and so forth, and they are just as indigenous to the land of Israel as the Native Americans are to the United States. But the thing, the young people don't want to see that. It reminds me when in the beginning, 100 years ago, you would call the American Indians savages, right?
Mm.
Even though it's their country, because why the enemy came in, took over, colonized, and made the natives into the bad people. The same thing happened with us. You know, we are the indigenous people. Came in the Arabs 1400 years ago. They colonized us. They threw us out, and then they took over and they made a new narrative. But they have the ability with Islam and spreading the almost 1.6 billion people to spread this lie and then to trick young people. So that's the question to ask. How can we change people's view, the mindset of the young people?
Well, it's a $1 million question, right? I'm not sure that there's one answer that or one shoe that fits all. I think it has to be a multifaceted approach. A lot of this has to be attributed to the modern reality in which we live. I mean, I'm not, I don't regard myself as a very old person, but I am one of the maybe last few generations that we didn't study from internet. I had to open the book and I had to look for sources. And today, information is on one hand incredibly easy to find, literally by click, but at the same time, the value of due diligence and research is almost non-existent, right? And it is much more difficult to distinguish between fake news and facts because the young people are being bombarded. So on one hand, they're not necessarily taught to use the encyclopedia and original sources the way that previous generations were, and they are also much more impatient because they are used that information is made readily available. And at the same time, there's a cacophony. They're being bombarded by information from different sides. And it is very difficult to distinguish for them what is right and what is wrong. And oftentimes they don't have the time. Our reality is being dictated by 180 characters tweet, and the news cycle is dictated by that, meaning that their entire generation is also views the reality in those terms, which makes it impossible for them to now vet every tweet and every statement. It is journalism, if you'd like, has become activism, right? The journalist first decides what he or she wants to report on, and then they tailor sort of the story accordingly. And I think that is the great challenge, how to sort of um, uh, reconcile between incredible amount of information available out there and resources. I mean, the AI today and the things that we can do today, it's incredible, and it offers such opportunities that we couldn't have thought of before. But at the same time, it almost creates an abyss in which it is very easy to lose yourself, to lose oneself, or get lost in fake news and propaganda. And especially as a young person, as you said, we all want to do what is right. We all want to change the world. We are driven by our ideals, and we are driven by our wish to be activists. And it is sometimes, sadly enough, to hear a very compelling sounding case that allows us to fight for someone we perceive as the weak or the oppressed, and we are sort of being, carried away. I mean, take a look at the violence on the U.S. and Canadian campuses this past year. I do not think that all the students that protested are anti-Semites. I think most of them are ignorant. The bigger question is, and this leads me to my ultimate answer to you. The bigger question is for the entire system to do a better job at investigating who is really behind all these things. So very often when we think that protests or initiatives or campaigns are organically generated, we should know better that they are not. And most of the things in the social media sphere is not organically generated. And we need to follow the money on one hand, which is also something that we at NGO Monitor do, but we also need to follow who are the actors behind that. And oftentimes we will see that it is radical, sometimes terror affiliated, and definitely always fear mongering, radical, hate promoting actors that are mobilizing young people and mobilizing masses. If you talk to experts in counter-terror, for example, they will tell you that this is using and abusing charities. I'm going back to the NGOs, because on campus is also one of the main driving forces were these organizations that with amazing names, Jewish Students for Peace, I mean, Justice for Palestine, and so on, solidarity movements. And it is very easy for a young person who is not very well informed to be fooled by them. But a counter-terror expert will tell you that terror organizations, one of the main ways in which they spread their influence sphere, or they smuggle, or they launder money, or they promote their agendas and radicalize or recruit, are charities, right? Just like you said in the previous example, because all these things are interlinked and point basically to the same phenomenon. You would have a mosque or a charity that feeds the hungry or helps, in underprivileged areas of your city, but it is just a disguise for a terror organization or a radical movement. And it is the same, I think, when it comes to how we advise our young people to choose who to work with, who to listen to, how to vet. Now, it starts with regulating the public space, whether it is a campus, right? Who can enter the campus, who can fund things on campus, who can organize protests and events on campus, and having more transparency on these issues. But we can make it even a bigger issue, on a societal level. Who do we fund? Who do we give our public space to use for? Is everything protected by freedom of speech, or is there a red line? And I think, especially in modern reality, we need to do a better job at regulating the public space so that we know which things, causes, narratives, discourses, actions need to be penalized. I do believe that not everything, and I know this goes against the foundations of the U.S. culture, for example. And this is, call it the European in me, not everything can be protected by freedom of speech and democracy, right? Because if you violate my rights, then that is not called freedom of speech. If you call for violence, right, and if you incite against another group or another individual, or you spread hate, or you promote a US, for example, designated organization, then you cannot be protected by freedom of speech or democracy and so on. And I think that is the challenge. How do you, in a modern society, protect the foundations of a democratic society? And you do not silence, right, critical discourses and opposing opinions, and you allow a debate between movements and people who think different, while at the same time making sure that, just like a white supremacist, if he or she spreads hate, knows that the system will know how to penalize it, because the system was trained and taught to identify it, vet it, then prosecute it, and then legally penalize it, right? The same should be the case with the more sophisticated and more contemporary types of anti-Semitism in the context of our conversation, which is basically, where do you draw the line between this constitutes legitimate criticism of the state of Israel, but when you cross a certain line, this is no longer criticizing Israel. This is basically calling for its destruction or denying its right to exist, or applying double standards to Israel that you would not apply to any other country, and so on and so on. And I think that is the challenge for all of us that are active in this sphere, on multiple levels. It starts with teaching our young to be proud, right, of their Jewish heritage and Jewish identity, and their connection to Israel being one of the most central elements of that. And I think we haven't done a good enough of a job in doing that in the past few decades. On the contrary, I think the established Jewish world, or the Jewish communities, they have done exactly the opposite. They have sort of made it a point in distinguishing, we represent the Jews of Germany, but not the state of Israel. So when there's a conversation about Israel, we step aside. And that translated itself also on how our younger generation views this issue. And I think we need to, introspectively, we need to do a better job and probably revamp how we educate Judaism and how we teach Jewish identity in the 21st century. But then outside of our own community, we need to demand from our elected officials to better regulate the public space so that we are better protected, from campuses to the streets, to workplaces, wherever, to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, because at the end of the day, it is the same issue and the same challenge that we are facing. And by the way, all of it in each of these areas, vilifying Jews because of their connection to Israel, and vilifying Israel because as long as it's a Jewish homeland, is done under the auspices of promoting human rights and everything just, which is the biggest oxymoron, I guess, of the 21st century.
True. It's very true. You have a very good point when you mentioned that the Jews can't separate each other from each other. And October 7th has shown us that the whole Jewish community around the whole world is affected together. Besides being a rabbi, I'm also a filmmaker and a political writer. And in 2019, I wrote an article for the Times of Israel, and I call it Jew Season. The idea was basically I had said to make a movie. What would the future look in the year 2030? An idea came to me basically was that all the people in Ivy League schools would become BDS brainwashed people, and by the time 2030, they would be the leaders. So my scenario starts with September 2030. The UN is about to vote Israel out of existence and begin a mass worldwide Jew hunt. That's why I named the movie. It's called the Jew Season. When I wrote it in 2019, people said I was basically too much imagination, and I was arguing. Unfortunately, now 2023, 2024 came true.
It doesn't sound like science fiction anymore.
Correct. Exactly. And what I did was I wanted to make a movie saying what can be, what will be, and we have to prevent it using social media, using the idea that Jews are on the run now. And that being the case, then we see over here that the situation has turned in such a way that we are now on the run. And a very good point you mentioned is that fact that is anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. Are we saying that when you criticize Israel, is it legitimate, or basically have you crossed the line? Now, interesting to note that in one hand, the non-Jewish world has been waiting for this for 75 years. Why so? Because for 75 years, we've always told the world, you made a genocide against us. The Shoah, the Shoah, the Shoah. So now when they had the chance, all of a sudden, oh, let's see how you're doing when it comes to war. Genocide this, genocide that. Even though deep down, if they see the numbers, it's not a genocide. There's no intention to do genocide. But over here now, so to speak, you see the righteous person, quote unquote, the underdog of the world, has all of a sudden been in the same situation. Now, let's see how holy they are. So it's one way to get rid of the guilt of the mass guilt that Europe has and the people of the world has because they didn't step in World War II for us. And even when Israel was declared a state in 1948, they didn't step in either. They never stepped in, if you think about it. That being the case then, so we mentioned about the youth and so forth. That is a situation whereby we have the idea of a political situation now. We have a turnaround where, for example, the working class of America woke up. They saw what happens. They voted basically Democrats out of power. And you mentioned before now the left has become the anti-Semitic aspect of it because they say they're anti-Zionism and Zionism is racism. So I know for an aspect because I come from the left. And being come from the left, I understand a very, very important point people don't understand that the left believes that the ends justify the means, no matter what. That's what the left believes because they're holier than thou and they can do things because they know better. So that being the case, can we change the left, or do we have to make a whole new type of paradigm whereby the left is pushed out for maybe another 10 years until they can regroup and understand that they're basically being individuals who are self-righteous to the point of arrogance, to the point of being closed-minded. And he's mentioned before, in Europe and even America too, you have to respect the other side. You have to hear the other person's viewpoint. Even yell, you can't yell fire in the theater, as Supreme Court Justice said 100 years ago. So there's a limit. So what limit do we limit freedom? And at the same token, the NGO, what you're doing is, how have you found out from your experience to use legal terms and legal mechanisms to, so to speak, outsmart these people who are trying to maneuver and use law against righteous good people, against the Jewish people?
I believe that there's nothing new under the sun. And you being a rabbi, you're much more knowledgeable than me. And particularly when it comes to the Jewish history and anti-Semitism, that is most certainly the case. I mean, any type of hate against Jews that we see now, we have seen in the past already. The left being weaponized against the Jews was the raison d'etre of the former Soviet Union. And pretty much the same anti-Semitic tropes that we see prevail in the progressive circles today were already present in former Soviet Union, including all the anti-Zionist tropes. And usually, I always say that the left, everything is cyclical, and the left and the right, as the further to the extremes they go, at some point they meet, and they meet in how extreme they are, but they also meet. They have one common denominator, and that is their hate against Jews. Because all hates begin with Jews. I always say it starts with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. And the level of anti-Semitism in any one society is probably the best barometer of how healthy that society is when it comes to overall freedom and human rights and tolerance and so on. And when the levels of anti-Semitism start going up, that country and that society should start worrying that something is broken in the code of conduct, sort of. So it's not to say that what we are seeing in the progressive circles now is not horrible and dangerous, both verbally and physically, because I very much agree with you that the left, everyone wants to believe that the far right and the extreme right, but I think that the far left is much more militant in many ways than the far right, especially as someone coming from Eastern Europe. I cannot stress this enough. Young people today and people in general, that romanticize socialism and communism. They don't know what they're talking about, because there's nothing more oppressive than that world order and that regime. I do think, and we see this already, right? If you look at Europe today, and I'll finish with the US elections, right, and the new administration, but the trend started way before that. As an antithesis to this progressive, in the US, woke, and in Europe it's not called woke, but it's pretty much the same narratives. As the antithesis to that, and as a response to that, over the last 5-6 years, we have seen a very steady trend of the rise of the more conservative, all the way to very, very right-wing parties and governments. You are looking at a situation in Europe today, in end of 2024, where Sweden has never had a further right government in place than today, where Italy has a very right-wing government in power, where the Netherlands elected, Wilders, who was only a few years ago considered the far right and extreme, where in France, Le Pen basically took elections, and it took some very politically savvy crafting for the other sides to craft a coalition, but she won the popular vote. So Austria, Hungary, and I can go on and on. More countries in Europe are today governed by conservative and further right-wing from conservative parties than probably ever before since the Second World War. And I think we've seen the same in the US. The fact that, in percentages, the US Muslim community voted for the Trump administration is, to some, might be mind-blowing. But at the end of the day, elections are not won over foreign affairs issues. Elections are not won in any one country over what your country is going to do on a Middle East conflict. Elections are won over what is that going to mean for me.
Looking for a holiday read that will change your outlook on life? Through Fire and Water is a gripping tale of redemption, love, and suspense. This thriller will have you hooked from start to finish. For more information, click the link in the description.
So elections are won over what is am I going to have better life or not? And I think in the US and in many countries today, people are saying, I want better economy. I want a safer streets. I want better, law enforcement. Yes, I think the American society basically says, I want a slightly more conservative society, right? And not, gender politics and so on. And I think that is a trend that we're seeing. Now, it's a double-edged sword, right? Like with every extreme, if it goes too far, it might do the opposite from what it is intended. I think that is the challenge for us as the Jewish community and as the state of Israel, navigating these turbulent waters. It almost the equivalent could be what's going on in Syria right now, right? It might be a very good development for us, and it might even open doors to potential peace one day with the Syrian people, because we don't hate the Syrian people. We don't hate the Lebanese people. It's just that the regimes and the governments. But at the same time, because it's so volatile and chaotic, it might also go terribly wrong for us and become another battlefield. And I think much is the same with political trends and tectonic movements that we are seeing around the world now, and we just have to be very careful. And I think just insist with whoever is in power that the public space is regulated when it comes to what constitutes anti-Semitism to us.
Change the whole education.
No one defines what constitutes Islamophobia on behalf of the Muslim community, right? We reach out to their leaders and we ask them, tell us, what is Islamophobia for you? What is offensive to you, right? I don't know if your viewers will remember this, but back in the early 2000s, when the French paper Charlie Hebdo, right, published the cartoons of Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, and so on, the entire Muslim community got on its feet, and actually the intelligentsia, right, the intellectual, the community said, well, if it's offensive to them, who are we to say that it's not? But when it comes to Jews, everyone feels that they have a right to define for us what is anti-Semitic. When I debate on TV and so on, proper anti-Semites, because they'll say proper anti-Semitic things, and I don't actually know a better way to deal with them. And I just say, look, I cannot debate an anti-Semite because you are saying anti-Semitic things. So it's not a civilized conversation. Your comments are motivated by pure hate against the Jews. So, it's not a factual debate. Then they'll say to me, well, I'm just criticizing Israel, and the IDF and whatever. And you Jews always do this. You always call us anti-Semites and you hide behind that. Now, the fact that they feel comfortable saying that, but they would never, ever allow themselves to say that to a Muslim person and say, you're not, you don't know how to discuss democracy. You're just calling it Islamophobia because you're hiding behind that. And not only Muslim, whether it's Sikh or Jains or Christians or whatever it is, only when it comes to Jews, everyone else gets to be super smart on what constitutes anti-Semitism for us. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do a better job at insisting that is not okay. That is not something that we will allow. Only who we decide and only we know what is offensive to us. And if they respect their boundaries, they have to absolutely respect ours. And we have allowed this conversation to become relative in the past few decades, probably because there was anti-Semitism, but it wasn't as horrible and not as existential as it has been for the global Jewish community since October the 7th. And in that sense, I think it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to redefine the conversation, to redefine the discourse, and redefine what is the minimum common denominator that we absolutely demand, right? And nothing below that will be tolerated by us. And so, yeah, as horrible as this past year has been, I think it has also brought to the forefront things that have always been there, but they haven't hurt us as existentially as they have in this past year. And in that sense, it's every crisis is also an opportunity.
You know, you mentioned before about the idea that they're telling us how to feel Jewish. It's like a couple. One person is the abuser and one is abused. And the abuser always tells the abused how you're feeling, what's good for you, what are you thinking, and so forth. What's your feelings? And the abused says, no, this is not what I'm thinking. This is not what I feel. But you're not listening to me. You don't want to hear what I'm saying. And we've been in this relationship now for 2,000 years, basically. The once Judaism's offshoot into parts of it into Christianity. Then Christianity said, okay, listen, we can't be with the Jews because if we admit the Jews are correct, then basically our religion is false. So we have to push them away. We have to say they're bad, that they have broken the covenant with God. We have the New Testament and so forth. They're the old school with the new school. Then comes Islam. Islam then says, well, both schools are incorrect. Judaism is old and Christianity is old, and we're superior. So they're always telling us exactly how to feel and what to feel. And but what happens is now, for the first time in basically 2,000 years, we've stood up and said, enough's enough. You can't tell us how we're going to feel anymore. We have our pride, we have our dignity, we have our worth. We've given you basically all monotheism. We've given you ethics. We've given you morality. Love thy neighbor as thyself is our commandment. It's from the third book of Moses, from the Torah. Everything you have, basically, love thy enemy is also from the Torah too. The Torah tells you help your enemy when his donkey has to is down, load, unload, and so forth. Forgive your enemy. These are all Judaic concepts. So
Mhm.
now you say it's really Judaic, then you all of a sudden you're breaking the so to speak the brainwashing aspect of it. I'll give you an example. When I was doing my master's many years ago, 30 years ago, I had a friend, a Catholic, 25 years old at the time. We both 25, he was 25. And said to him, I want to show you something. I said, okay, what? I told him, open up the book. It was the Torah. And I said, open up the chapter to go to Leviticus, chapter 19, verse 18, and he reads it. And he reads it, and then his mouth was like open in shock. What did he read? Love thy neighbor as yourself. I am God. He said, wait a second. That's in the Torah? I said, yes, that's in the Torah. He says, Jesus didn't say that? No, Jesus did not say that. Jesus learned that from his rabbis. He read the Torah. Are you kidding me? He said. I said, I'm not kidding you whatsoever. Then he realized that all his paradigm, all his world was not real. Everything thought that was Catholic and he thought that was Jesus' thoughts were all Judaic. And it's standing over here as well, that we're standing up for the first time, so to speak, in 2,000 years and saying, we want to understand, we're the ones who created your culture. We're the ones who created your your mindset of giving freedom and dignity and so forth. Interesting to know, war crimes. War crimes is a Judaic concept. And how do we learn from? When after Abraham Avinu had to fight to rescue his nephew Lot, he had to fight against the kings. He said to God, I'm afraid maybe I killed too many people in the wars. That is presenting what the concept of war crimes. So you see, it's a Judaic concept of war crimes that maybe I went past the limit.
Incredible.
See? Incredible, right? So we see the basis of modern society is all Judaic. And that's another thing why there's so much against us. Because once you see that we're the truth, or the basis, their ideas is our thought process, mindset, and we're the minority, because that's what we are, then where do they stand? So of course they have to hate. They have to hatred comes from jealousy. Hatred comes from feeling, so to speak, what's really mine, what's really original. Are you more original than I am? So interesting point, because you had before a few days ago, you had Douglas Murray as a
Mhm.
guest. I didn't, and he something, I don't know if he said at that particular time, but he said a tremendous thing, very, very important thing that turned him off completely to the left, which was when they said, well, when they asked them, how do you justify killing babies? So they said, well, was the baby beheaded from the front of the head, from the back of the head? That's how they said that. Said once I heard that, Douglas Murray said that was it. I could no longer speak to them. That's the insanity of justifying evil. I never imagined in my thought I would see women tearing off pictures of babies from poles. So all of a sudden, a Jewish baby is different. A Jewish woman is different. So that's to ask you that question. How, if that's the situation that the anti-Semitism is so great that we are completely aliens in their mind, they can justify killing us, even when it comes to raping women or killing babies. How long do you think it could take? 20 years, 30 years to re-educate the people? What can it be done? Not be done? And how does an NGO has to be revamped, or can it be revamped under modern law, or we have to change a whole new law set? If Second Chances intrigue you, the quest Get Back Your Ex is a must-watch. 6 broken lives, 1 redemption journey. This show is packed with emotion, suspense, and love. Learn more by clicking on the link in the description below.
I actually want to. I'm much more optimistic than that. I think that most of the people around the world are not anti-Semitic. I genuinely believe that no one is born anti-Semitic and no one is born hating. We're all born the same way, right? And with a clean slate. We are brought up and educated to within certain belief systems. And even today, with everything that we have endured in the last 15 months since October the 7th, and all the hate and the media bias and the obsession, and as you say, the complete colossal failure of the human rights community to protect, defend, advocate for Israeli women, victims, hostages, killed, and all of us, by the way, who have been, subjected to tens of thousands of rockets day in, day out here in Israel, and attacked from 7 fronts at the same time. I still believe that the majority of people is not anti-Semitic. I have traveled extensively since October the 7th as well. I have met and spoken at multiple parliaments, and I have briefed hundreds of elected officials. We also have friends, and we also have people who wanna be on our side. The the challenge is that the ones that hate tend to be much more vocal and loud, and they mobilize the industries that have a multiplying effect, like media and social media platforms, and so on. And they have also come up with this, I mean, it's a genius strategy to say, you say the words human rights and protecting the poor Palestinian civilians displaced and so on, and then everyone, like, it's very difficult. When I speak to journalists, even to the objective ones and to the educated ones, to ones who do the preparatory work, they say to me, "You're right, but we have to somehow acknowledge the numbers of the victims on the Palestinian side." And the minute you get into that numbers game, we lose. Now, I want to go back to the more optimistic thing. I think that historically looking, we already won. We have a state, something we haven't had in how long, you know, and basically, what, 75 years since after the Holocaust, we have a thriving, vibrant Jewish homeland. that is our ultimate victory. I also want to say more than that. Even after October the 7th and everything that has happened, I don't think anyone questions whether Israel is going to exist tomorrow or in a year or in 100 years from now. Where we do need to fight back is the political battlefield, because there is a political warfare against us and against the Jewish people and against the Jewish state. And I think we need to use facts and figures because we are better than them, and not because we are quicker or smarter, or that's not the point. The point is that our value system dictates that we be better, that we do not resort, like the other side, to lies, fake news, distorted truths, or fabricated, stories. We don't need to revise our history or invent things. We know the history, so we have to stick to our facts and figures and trust that ultimately they do win. And this is also what we do at NGO Monitor. We provide facts and figures about what these organizations actually do, and then we share them with governments, because many of them are actually funded through official humanitarian aid and other governmental programs, meaning taxpayers' money. And when we show them the facts and the figures, and we say, you believe that this organization is promoting women's rights, or you believe that this organization is advocating for the rights of the Palestinian peasants to have access to land and work the land, agriculturally, but instead their financial director and CEO took part in a terror attack in 2019 in which a 17 years old Israeli girl was brutally murdered, then their minds blow up. And not immediately, because no system likes changes, right? The system wants to maintain itself. But over time and slowly, they do stop funding them, and we do see that they are introducing better checks and balances, and they're looking more critically. And sometimes you have to push them, in the right direction. Sometimes you have to shame them a bit. You have to put them on spot. But I think the same has to be the case by and large. To all those that are very opinionated against us, we need to confront them. We need to expose them when they're lying and when they're, spreading lies and fabricated truths. And yes, the fight is not fair, because when the Palestinians release an image, right, of a dead Palestinian boy covered in blood, and it takes 3 minutes for this image to go around the world, and everyone is devastated. It takes us a week to prove that it was actually an image from Aleppo in Syria, right? And it has nothing to do with Gaza, because we have to run it through this database and then consult our legal system and legal advisors and make sure that we are not all these, because we don't just throw things out there, but we have to acknowledge that to be on the right side of history, that's what it means. And sometimes it takes a longer time, but that does not mean that we will ever resort to their methods and to their discourse. Our way has proven itself. We have a vibrant democracy. I cannot stress this enough. Inside of the Israeli society, inside of the Jewish community, we have people fighting each other over what's Zionism, what's Judaism, who is a Jew, how do you become a Jew? Name it, we debate it, and everyone gets an equal space. If there's an actual democracy, that is the Jewish community and the state of Israel. And we have to celebrate that and trust that if we stick to that, we shall prevail, or we shall continue to thrive. Because despite the fact that we were attacked, and you mentioned 2000 years of history of persecution and pogroms and hate, different types and forms of hate, and since the creation of the State of Israel, we have had wars and terror attacks and intifadas, and yet we're still here and thriving. And even if you look at the last 15 months, many can talk about the colossal failure on October the 7th. And yes, right, we should have done a better job. But we can also talk about a miracle. We are a tiny army with an economy that was isolated, right? And flights that were canceled. And yet we have been fighting on 7 fronts for full 15 months. I don't know any country where people would, there would be 160% response to recruitment, right? To drafting. And now we have another front, and we just seem to be able to go on, although everyone is exhausted. I think we need to find strength within ourselves to continue the same way that we have done until now. We have to believe that we are doing the right thing and defend it. And then we have to be smart. And I'm very critical when it comes to our ability to make a difference in the social media sphere, because the numbers are against us and the algorithms are against us, right? The more something is shared, the more it will be shared. And then it's almost like a tautology. We can never win that. But again, I have to go back to saying that regulate the public space. There's always going to be haters. We can never eradicate all hate or all anti-Semites, haters in general. But what we can do, we can continue to update the legal system and the public sphere so as to make sure that when they say it publicly and they're caught red-handed, that the system knows how to identify it, put a name on it, and penalize it. I'll give you an example. In 2006 or 7, there was an attempt of arson at a local synagogue in a small German city, Wuppertal. And the local police arrested 2 young Palestinian men. And when they were brought in front of the judge said that it was not a hate crime. Why? Because the judge said this was just this was an act that was an expression of their political frustration over what was going on in the Middle East. Now, if the same thing happens in Germany today, in 2024, it would most certainly be persecuted as a hate crime, because the legal system, and not only the legal system, but the German society and the German political system has evolved, has come a long way in understanding what constitutes anti-Semitism. And after they did that, they trained their police officers, their school teachers, their public administration people. I mean, I can tell you that currently there's a program that Lufthansa flight attendants are being trained on what are modern manifestations of anti-Semitism. We cannot assume that a random person somewhere in the world knows where's the difference between classical anti-Semitism and medieval anti-Semitic tropes and anti-Zionism. With all due respect to us, I don't think we're that important to them. Just like when we watch the news, whatever happens in Cambodia maybe gets 5 seconds of our primetime news. We have to understand that for most of the people, that's Israel, right? In their primetime news. So we have to be proactive at regulating and defining within that public space what is okay and what is not okay. And trust that that we will continue to be on the right side of history, because the history actually throughout our 2000 years long journey has taught us that we are doing something right, because it's almost against all the odds,
Yeah,
right?
miraculous. There's no question about it. First of all, it's all from God. No one can deny the creator being involved. You mentioned also before the idea basically about it's education. It's very true, it's education. If you notice very carefully, if you go to countries like India or China and so forth, where there's no Christianity and there's no Islam, there's no anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism comes from Christianity and Islam because again, we're the competing, so to speak, we are the originators of the monotheism, so we're the competition. So the question is how will the Christianity would change its viewpoint, which it has. Many Christians have changed over the years. The Holocaust was the one that took them to have a different mindset. And Islam is also evolving too. Now, I myself, when the war began, I joined the Swords of Shields unit here in North Israel. And you mentioned before the democracy that's in Israel. My commanders are Muslim. My commanders are Druze, right? So they're telling me what to do and so forth. So you can see the amazing democracy we have. In the middle of war, this is happening, and yet we have a democracy. We didn't declare a military state. We could have done that, like Roosevelt did in World War II. We took all the Japanese, put them in
Right.
camps. If we could have done it with 2 million Arabs, could we trust them, not trust them? We could have taken all the Arabs commanders from the police and the army and said, listen, we can't trust you. You may do it right now, fifth column. We didn't do that. We saw there's a bond between us. We preached them as human beings. We saw there's a certain connection. Now, you mentioned before about Israeli PR. If you notice, I wrote a thesis about this. In 1977, you see what was the change? Happened in 1977 that changed everything. Who became prime minister in 1977? It was Begin. And I remember very well as a child, Time magazine had this way: terrorist becomes prime minister of Israel. Why so? Because Begin represented the right wing, the King David Hotel, and so forth. So now that had been the case, then people were waiting for the moment when we had a strong right wing person who's always was activating or speaking about conquering both sides of the Jordan, and yet he was the one who made the peace accords, Begin, right? Now it comes now in 1982. 1982 comes now. Sharon gets the idea of going into Beirut and having a greater democracy, and then came Sabah Pajatila. From 1977 until now, Israel, the right wing, unfortunately, has not invested in PR. PR was a very important mechanism, weapon of the left wing Zionists, labor Zionists. Ben Gurion, Levi Eshkol, Golda Meir were masters of this. And yet they were able to do both, to conquer, to recapture, make a state, and present ourselves in a very, very presentable way. So that is something that we have to relearn again, is how to present ourselves to the world in a very smart way, a truthful way, because the truth does always win the day. But as you mentioned before, once you make a lie, it takes a week to fix the lie. It's slander, right? And human beings love slander. If you look at all the newspapers, the Hollywood, TM, all these things, slander, slander, slander. Someone says something terrible about somebody else, you assume it must be right because why would they say slander? And then it takes a few weeks, few months until you disprove it. But by that time, the slander's already got inside subconscious. So you mentioned before you talked to reporters, and now the reporters will say, well, the numbers. What were the numbers in Dunkirk? What were the numbers in World War II? What about the fact that it wasn't until 1948 there was no Jewish state? That means for 2,000 years, who was making all the wars around the world? It wasn't the Jews. The Jews warned Genghis Khan. The Jews warned the Romans. The Jews warned the Arab marauders. The Jews warned the Crusaders. It was the non-Jewish people for 2,000 years making the wars. And we didn't make any wars. Yet, we're now like we're the worst in history. Are we worse than Genghis Khan? Are we worse than Mao Zedong? Are we worse than Stalin? Obviously not. But it's a point of where the numbers are not seen because they don't want to see the fact that really it's not a genocide. A person like Douglas Murray is a man of truth. He's a man of truth. And that's what we have to emphasize always to tell people if you want to be a person of dignity, you must, of integrity, you must report the truth. You can't, go left or right. That's basically, that's propaganda. So we're having another 5 minutes left to the conversation. So now, question over here, we mentioned about media and youth and so forth and algorithms. Where, and in fact, in 14 months, the radical change. Who thought 14 months later Syria would be gone? Syria's gone. Who thought the Hamas would be gone? Hezbollah would be gone, and Iran now is falling apart. Now, what's the opportunities we have to now, with this new shift of the Middle East changing? Do you think that if there's a new Syria, a new Lebanon, how will that affect the NGOs? Will they have to, so to speak, redefine their anti-Zionism rhetoric? Because now the Middle East may change radically. Saudi Arabia may have a peace deal with us. Syria may come with us. I saw yesterday a Syrian rebel making a video. I don't know if you saw the video, saying we want peace. We want you to invest in Syria. If that
Yeah.
changes in the Middle East, will it change the rhetoric? Will it change BDS and so forth? Or will not have an effect? Or will it take time with the NGOs? What do you think?
I think what will happen is similar, but just probably on a larger scale to what happened to many of these NGOs after October the 7th. They were in sort of an existential crisis because now all of a sudden they didn't know, they couldn't cope with the fact that they should condemn Hamas, right, for this horrible massacre and attack. So for for a while, many of them, I'm not talking about the Palestinian ones, right? They immediately accused us and denied atrocities and so on. But a lot of the other groups sort of like were silent because they didn't know what to do. And and I think this a similar thing might happen now because they sort of lost the main target, right? The main uh, who's culpable for everything, which is Israel. It's so easy to say, Palestinians don't have a democracy and don't have an economy because of the occupation. Palestinians don't have this, or the Lebanese don't have this because of the Israeli, whatever. It's too easy. I think that one of the things that might happen to the NGO industry that it will be in sort of an existential crisis, but I wouldn't go as far to say that they would change their narrative. I think that the obsession is runs too deep and too long that for them to completely change their strategy is even too costly. It will require changing the leadership. And as long as you have the same leadership, they will keep revamping the narrative. I mean, I'll give you an example. After the apartheid libel was launched after the Abraham Accords. That which is basic, like it was very interesting to think about it. Like before that, it was about Netanyahu and what is he going to do, and there was settlements and not settlements, and what is the Trump administration back then going to do about the settlements? This was the discourse, and then all of a sudden Trump and Netanyahu blew everyone's mind with the Abraham Accords. And then the NGO industry was like they were in disarray. And as an answer, they had to take it one notch higher. And then they accused Israel of apartheid and then launched this huge reports and what will you and the ICC, the UN Commission of Inquiry, was created as a result of that to investigate whether Israel is committing these crimes. And that was sort of their response. The it's like a funnel, right? That goes the other way around. Like the better that we do, or the more that we prove that we're not, the more aggressive their campaign has to be. sadly, because once corrupted, it's very difficult to repair the system. My hope would be that actually the vacuum that they might leave in truly addressing humanitarian issues and challenges and human rights issues, because the fact that that Assad fell is, and I say this again as someone from Eastern Europe, it's almost like now the day after, that was the easy part.
Mm.
The difficult part now is building a state and by people who for what 60 years almost
Yeah.
they don't no one knows there what democracy is. No one was born into democracy or a regular, an organized uh, system where government is accountable or and so on. So I sort of hope that other organizations might fill the vacuum and give a real answer to these questions. And I sort of hope that Israel will know to leverage, Israel and the US and the international community will know to leverage that and create consortiums or some sort of mechanisms that will know how to work with each other to create something better. We have the same challenge in Gaza, right? What will Gaza look like after the end of the war, whenever it might it might be? Who will rebuild Gaza and what will be the reality? Who's going to teach the children in the schools? Going back to your original question about education, hate is taught, and the people of Gaza were taught over decades that Israelis are villains and the occupiers and the Zionists and so on. And the same was the case in Syria and Lebanon. And the biggest questions are now, what is that education going to look like in these countries? Are we going to build coalitions? Are we going to push for the organizations who really want to help these countries build something and give them a platform? Or is the world going to fall into the default system, which is yet again giving it to the same 10 big organizations who have failed colossally in every country where they have operated, not only here in the Middle East and not only here in Israel, um, and allow them to just do that over again, just with much more money. I think that's the big decision and the big battle historically that we will be seeing now. And I can tell you that on our end, at NGO Monitor, we will be giving our little contribution to pushing for the right actors and making sure that Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Norwegian Refugee Council, and many, many others are not given another chance because they have just failed. And I always, when I talk to elected officials around the world, I say to them, they haven't failed Israel. Leave Israel apart. They failed the Palestinian people because instead of building a democracy there, giving their women, equal access to rights and to the society, children access to to healthcare and so on. Uh, they have completely radicalized the society and they have diminished it
Good to
to
say.
a bipolar discourse, Israel or not.
Thank
So
you.
I think that's our big challenge.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was very enlightening, very, very informative. We learned a lot about NGOs. We learned about what's behind, so to speak, the nobility of NGOs, that we shouldn't be naive, that we have to see that things have changed radically in the last 70 years, that unfortunately bad players have entered the NGOs. It's become another form of warfare. Basically, it's propaganda. Like Sun Tzu, the great military genius, said the best way to win a war is from the inside. Basically, meaning propaganda. Propaganda is by changing people's minds, causing hatred, causing misinformation. The camera is a great thing, meaning what Lech Walesa, who was the head of Poland, brought down Russia with the camera. Martin Luther King, when he went into the South with the camera, all of a sudden saw the badness of the South. The camera is good and the camera is bad. And people have to be very, very clever nowadays to understand what the camera's all about, especially with TikTok and fake news and so forth and AI. We've come to the point that your organization, NGO Monitor, and is doing a very special work. The work is that you're putting time and effort to break down lies. So to speak, why should a person waste, quote unquote, waste their time breaking down lies and slander? It's a noble thing. Even though slander is so meaningless. There's no truth there whatsoever. But that slander then causes hatred, and hatred causes misinformation, causes causes misdirection, and it causes also, in the end, violence. Hatred was what causes World War II. It caused Nazism and all these other terrible things. Hatred is what causes, to this very day, the fact that they have the extreme Islamists who want to kill every single Jew, and so forth. And that's in the last point this way. People have to also remember it's an ideological war. Ideology comes from what? Propaganda. It doesn't come from swords. If you teach someone to hate, they will hate. You teach them to love, they will love. And what you're doing is a tremendous thing because you're you're doing something that's very, very noble. You're using your mind, your intellectual abilities, your ability to speak, to say that we, the Jewish people, are not going to just only fight with our hands, which we can do, but also will fight with our minds. And to conclude this way is Jacob. Jacob says it's the voice of Jacob by the hands of Esau, meaning what? That we can also fight too. We have that ability too. With a physical fight, you can see what the IDF can do. But also, we're going to fight with truth. We're going to fight with truth, and we're going to knock you down with truth. And nothing can overcome truth. And it takes time. It takes much more willpower, concentration, focus, and patience. And so this we learned from you, and we want to commend you and thank you for this wonderful opportunity that we can hear this wonderful insights. And may we encourage all the people who watch the show to be involved and to help Israel. And to, as you said, we mentioned before, you can't donate your money, donate your time, donate your life. There's nothing more worthwhile than the Jewish people. The greatest story ever told. And Zionism is not just a political force. It's the dream of the Jewish people for 2,000 years, for 4,000 years. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to sum it up better than you. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed talking to you a lot, and I hope that we have offered in this show a little bit more information and more details to people, but also hope. So thank
Yes.
you very much for having me.